Do you ever hit a wall, right? When you just, your brain refuses to function, your body just sort of stops. You're pushing, you're pushing, you're pushing, you're wanting to make something happen, and it just isn't happening. Well, that's what happened to me just recently. I was trying to make some content, to create some content for a blog post, and I found myself stuck and stuck and stuck. No matter how much I kept pushing and trying, it just simply, I just hit a wall. Nothing. My mind wasn't creating. And so if you're a leader, and basically anyone goes through this situation, but especially if you're in like a high demand environment, like manufacturing, this kind of wall hitting is familiar and it's frustrating, right? And maybe your tendency is to just double down and to push your way through, maybe get more caffeine or get some sort of music or food, or just to kind of like energize and like push and push and push. Maybe it's just sheer willpower, then you kind of push through. Or maybe you zone out. Maybe you kind of like, oh, I can't do this, right? Well, today I want to introduce a model that I've introduced in other videos, other contexts, called the Leadership Aperture model. And this comes from the Telos Institute. And it's a brilliant model that helps you just track and build the capacity to narrow and widen your aperture. And what does this mean? This is leadership aperture. What this means is that it's how much information are you taking in? How much information are you using in any given moment? So in this particular case, a narrow aperture, well, and I want to focus on attention management specifically. And it's really important because our attention is such a finite aspect of who we are, and our attention is dragged through the mud all the time. It's just, we get distracted so much, we get overwhelmed. And, a lot of people say I have ADD, and in some senses, it's not like, it's a recent phenomenon that people are getting ADD because we're so overloaded, the brain doesn't know how to do it. And so we go into a default reactivity mode for how to deal with it. Well, in this video, I want to show you 3 options you have. In any given moment when you hit the wall and you can't pay attention, you can't focus anymore. And the 3 options are narrow, medium, and wide aperture. Okay? So let's just focus on attention. So if you are at narrow aperture, when we're at narrow aperture, we are really dialed in, we're very narrow, and we have a checklist usually. We're going to one thing at a time, right? Just execute, execute, execute. We are really narrowing it to the minimum amount of information possible. And this is often a really nice place to be if we're going in the right direction. Sometimes we can be so fixated on just getting stuff done that we actually get stuff done in the wrong direction. We get the wrong stuff done. And so, or we might just miss some things. So we might be working on a project that is not actually in alignment with the strategic goals of the company. Or maybe, then what we would do is we would widen our aperture so that it's a medium aperture. And at a medium aperture, we align our attention strategically with consideration of, well, how does this fit? What is it really important? What's really important for me to prioritize my attention on? Right? What is it that I need to get rid of, stop focusing on, and what do I have to start focusing on? So this is intentional. It's more strategic, right? And it still requires discipline. It requires intentionality, planning, really mental focus, and it's oftentimes on the mind. Emotions and bodily states are intentionally leveraged for the sake of the goal. So what's the goal, and how can I make my body and my mind focus towards that goal? And this is really powerful because you get, in some senses, you are able to get more done over a longer period of time more effectively. So you get things done that are in alignment with a broader range of considerations, goals, strategy. Now, the downside of being here is that, what if we are so focused on getting the quarterly goal accomplished? Maybe we have a new onboarding program, for example, a new onboarding program. I spent, days, being able to put together this new onboarding program using this app, right, and this desktop application, only to realize 2 weeks later that, this does not enable a third of my employees to use it because they don't have computers. So it's like, oops, it looked good on paper. It followed according to the strategy and the goals of the company, but it wasn't connected to what people's lived experiences were. And so you're just sort of forcing it, right? So when we're medium aperture, we may miss connecting with real people's lived experience that you won't know until you ask them, right? Or maybe we continue to push through this strategic planning and the goal setting, and we actually don't ask all the people that matter, right? Or we don't invite participation of others. So our attention is really, focused and composed on our strategic alignment and execution, but we don't consider people's experiences, right? And so that's when we widen our aperture to really take in much more. And so when we widen our aperture in terms of attention, we can temporarily let go of the goals for a second and ask ourselves, wait a minute, what really matters here? Like, what really needs to be paid attention to? Sometimes this is where we tap into other ways of knowing, like our intuition. What do we feel drawn towards? Let me go connect with that thing. Is that really important, right? Or, it could just be we widen our aperture and let go of the time, the rigidity to the time boundedness of the strategy or the plan, and we're flexible. And we look at the longer term, right? We actually, and when it comes to personal productivity, so back to hitting a wall, right? Let's say we hit a wall. We could either double down and narrow our aperture and get really focused, remove distractions, and just focus on one thing at a time. That might help us break through that wall and get things done. Or it might make us double down on the things that aren't needing to be done. So if we do in the other direction, if we widen our aperture, we take a breath. Maybe we take a walk, which is what I did today. I took a walk around the block and I just opened to the fresh air, to the birds and the trees and the neighbors walking their dogs, and my own body, and just was walking, relaxed, let go of all the goals and just sort of take a moment to breathe and open up to all of my knowing, all of my attention. My attention is not just the prefrontal cortex. The attention is my entire being. What is the information that I can gather here? Right? So I walked around the block, and then I sat down, and then I narrowed my attention again. Like, okay, so now let's focus on creating this content. And the mind was able to participate again. It worked. It's like, oh, okay, I can let go of the rigidity, but I actually have some things I want to say here, some creative content that I can create. And so maybe that's what you need to do when you hit a wall, is you widen your aperture, right? This happened to one of my clients recently, which is why I thought about this. And he pushed himself so hard that his body forced him to stop working at some point. He had all these goals, and he said, I can only really work for 1 or 2 hours a day, and the rest of the day my body just doesn't let me do it. I just collapse. And so I told him, well, what is it telling you? Why don't we widen our aperture and pay attention to not just the goals that you said you would do, but the experience of the feelings that you had. And when he tapped into his feelings, he realized that he had been putting so much pressure on himself. He wasn't actually dealing with some grief that was in him that was just, he just didn't pay attention to it. He was trying to bypass it. And his body, he had some grief from something that happened, pretty big thing that happened relatively recently. And as soon as he's able to tap into that feeling, that grief, the energy started to flow, and he got ready and he was able to go back into the work that he was doing and feel clarity and feel motivation and be able to pay attention to it. So, when we hit a wall, it's not that there's something wrong with us. Quite the opposite. In fact, oftentimes we hit a wall, and it's because our inner knowing, our whole person intelligence, is inviting us into transformation or growth or some sort of integration of something going on. So it's information. Hitting the wall is information. And so what will you do? If you're hitting a wall, the question is not how do you force yourself to do it no matter what. It's really about what's needed here. Do I need to narrow my aperture, or do I need to widen my aperture? And over time, it becomes a muscle that you simply develop, and that in the moment you can widen and narrow your aperture as needed, moment to moment. If this is at all interesting to you, that this leadership aperture framework, this is precisely how the Telos Institute designs its leadership program called the Vertical Frontier. The Vertical Frontier is a 7-month executive leadership program that trains leaders to have the capacity to widen their aperture and to narrow it and widen it as needed for the situation that it's called for. It might just be what you need to take you to the next level of your leadership journey. So I hope you appreciated this.